Well, that's not right. The study of human institutions is always a search for the most tolerable imperfections. Richard A. Epstein, American legal scholar. All right. Good morning. Welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. If you're tuning in live, then I want to especially thank you for giving me your time so early. Hopefully, today the conversation will be worth getting up and tuning in. Early hour of 7:20 in the morning. 20 minutes late now, mind you. I get it. I'm supposed to be here at 7 and family life sometimes, rushing around, getting people ready and whatnot. So it can be a bit of a challenge. We are working on that in the Liberty Dad household. However, until we get there, 7-ish. All right, what do we got for today? I woke up today and I didn't quite have a topic. And I was like, oh man. And I hate when that happens because I'm like, I either got to try to scramble to put something together. And that usually means I'm going to be really late because I got to go and like grab screenshots and grab videos and all this other stuff. And that can take a lot of time, especially if I don't quite have it narrowed down exactly what I want to talk about. Because usually what happens is I kind of have at least a general sense of the material that I want to use, kind of like cued. I've got it like bookmarked somewhere. Maybe I've got some YouTube videos saved or, whatever. I've kind of got these and I just got to go and compile them together in the morning and then kind of figure out, okay, what order do I want to show these and how do I want the conversation to go? So this is kind of my process, right? And this morning I woke up and I didn't have any of that. And I was like, man, what am I going to do? And I didn't really want to cancel the show because that's not good. Like somebody's gonna get up and want to watch the show and then I won't be there. And that's not gonna work. So then I was like, wow, what am I gonna talk about? So then I was like, you know what? There was an interesting conversation yesterday on Twitter, and I think there's something to be learned here. So let me start by saying this. I work what I call like what a lot of my entrepreneur friends will say, my W-2 job. I work for corporate America. And what I do is I come up with all manner of sorry, folks, I'm trying to do multiple things here. So my job is to basically create very elaborate spreadsheets. And when I say elaborate, I mean like one of my coworkers described my work as you create spaceships. And I'm not that's literally what they said. And so a while back, I didn't have a lot of work to do, and my supervisor was like, "Hey, why don't you just go and ask people like if they've got anything that you can automate?" Basically, I do automation. I automate like ETL type stuff, if you know what ETL is. Basically just take data and I manipulate it and just make it look differently, make it look, present differently, just a bunch of things like that. So my supervisor was like, "Hey, why don't you go and try and see what you can find to do? See if you can, go to some of your peers and maybe they've got something that they're struggling with that you can work on and automate for them. Maybe they've got a task. So like imagine that once a week you've got to download a report into Excel. You open it up and it's like this nice raw data, right? And it's got all these headers that have like, weird header names, and you got to change the names and you got to add columns and you got to delete columns. And maybe you got to do some calculations and you create a pivot table and you're doing all this, kind of stuff. And maybe that takes you like an hour, right? Assume it takes you like an hour and you have to do this every week. And, the first few times, it's not so bad, something new and novel, whatever. But then after a while, you're like, this is kind of boring. This is very routine. And this is just kind of like the doldrums, right? And so somebody like me might come along and say, well, I'll automate that for you so that all you've got to do is download the report and click a button. And then like 10 seconds later or however long, you know, uh, the things that I do will produce the output for you, and then you're done. Now you have an extra hour of your time that you can go do other things, and then you still have the same report, right? So you get the same benefit, but you don't have to do some of the work. So that's what I do. So I went around and I was like, hey, is there anything I can automate for you? And it's kind of a weird question, but like like I don't know what their work is necessarily. I don't know what they're doing. So I can't go and say, "Hey, that report that you have to produce every week that takes you 2 hours?" Like I don't know that kind of stuff, right? So I didn't really there was no way for me to clearly ask them, you know, where in a specific area that I might be able to assist them. So I kind of made it very vague and I was like, "Well, is there anything I can automate for you?" And everybody was like, "No, no, no." Like nobody. I was like, "Really?" I'm like, I I work in corporate America and nobody has anything that can be automated? Come on, people. Like, let's be for real here. And it was interesting because a prior supervisor would always find work. And one of the ways that she had done that, which she would be in these different meetings and somebody would be showing something or talking about something. And then she would, through that process, hear about a struggle that they were having. And she would say, "Hey, I've got somebody on my team that could probably help make that a little simpler." Right. And so she was always coming back. And I always had things that I could research, kind of like a little bit of R&D, and then that R&D might actually lead to some sort of production, work where they would actually utilize it. Maybe even a whole team would utilize it, right? And so this is what I did. So why am I telling you that? What does that have to do with liberty? What does that have to do with Twitter? Well, I think that the thing that libertarians need to recognize, and this is libertarians of all flavor, I use libertarians is a very generic word because I'm not interested in trying to list out, I don't want to enumerate every type of person in the liberty movement. So I just say libertarians, right? So what I think libertarians need to recognize is that people in general, when it comes to politics, when it comes to ideas and how we're going to make life better, I think they're largely unimaginative. In the same way, when I went to my coworkers and I would say, "Hey, is there anything for that I can automate for you?" Right? I don't think that people are very imaginative otherwise. And what I mean by that is if I go and I'm talking about liberty and I say, "Wouldn't it be so much better if we had much more freedom?" What does that mean? Right? Well, what if we just took away all these laws because they're an infringement on your rights? Okay, well, what is the conclusion? What is the end result of that? And I think that people tend to be very unimaginative, right? They don't imagine it in the way we might, right? And if they do imagine things, looks like my producers here, if they do imagine things, they imagine them very negatively, right? So it'd be the same as if I happen to walk around and I say, "Hey, is there anything I could automate for you?" Well, one of my coworkers many months later pointed out, they said, I was having a conversation about that. And one of my coworkers, another coworker, was like, "Yeah, it sounds like you just want to get rid of everybody's jobs." And I was like, "Oh my gosh." Like it never dawned on me that a simple question of what can I automate for you might sound like, how can I make you less valuable to the company? Versus what I was trying to communicate, which was, how can I help you so that your job is easier and you can be more productive in other ways? Like, which is really what I was trying to do. Because I'm not trying to automate people out of jobs. That's not what it was. But a coworker told me, like, that's what it came up. That's kind of what it sounds like. And I think when libertarians start talking about like getting rid of all these different things, it doesn't sound like, hey, I'm going to give you this valuable thing. It sounds like I'm going to take away all these things and, uh, well, just figure it out. It'll all work out somehow. Right. Like, I don't think it comes across in the way that we think. And I think we need to start recognizing how this comes across to people. Now, what does this have to do with Twitter? Well, anybody that's in the liberty sphere saw that Dave Smith was at it again, going back and forth with like a lot of people, right? And and when I say again, like this happens every now and then, there was a while back, and this was like a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. It was a long time ago. He stirred up the fury with people because he was talking about kicking homeless people out of parks, right? He was like, look, if you're going to be homeless and going to be doing drugs at the local park with kids, I have no problem bringing the police in and removing you. And then people like had a fit. And the reason that they had a fit was because they were looking at it like, hey, this is public property. Everybody who is a citizen has access to this, right? And it doesn't matter, even the homeless people who may not be paying taxes, they have access to it because um, at some way they are a citizen, so therefore they're a part of the public. And there isn't any mechanism that says like, okay, if you pay taxes, okay, well then you are, if you have paid taxes this year, then you get this. It's just kind of like, you're a citizen, you have access to public property. That's how it works. And if you happen to not pay taxes, that's not relevant, right? Like if you happen to get all the money, like if you pay taxes, but then you get it all back, which means you effectively didn't pay tax. I mean, technically you did, but like let's assume for a moment that we look at it like you didn't really pay taxes at the end of the game. At the end of the day, you still have access to that, and it doesn't matter whether you pay a little bit of taxes or you pay a lot of taxes, right? Like you still have access by virtue of being a citizen in that community, or at least in the United States. Right. So people were having a fit about this. Well, he was at it again, talking about something similar. And this was about, the idea well, let's put it up on the screen. Actually, let's talk about the tweet. And he had multiple tweets, right? Like there's a huge conversation. So I'm gonna kind of start in the middle and we're gonna work our way from there. We're gonna talk about like how what this has to do with Excel and like I'm drawing some weird strings here, some weird connections. Like, what does this have to do with corporate America and me walking around and communicating to people that I would like to help them? And maybe you already see where it's going. So let's put this up on the screen. It'd be so much better if we did that. All right. There we go. All right, perfect. And so now we have it up on the screen here. And focus on the second sentence, okay? Because he's quote tweeting somebody, and I don't want to try to roll back to the very very beginning and include all this stuff. I think this will be sufficient to illustrate my point. He says, if your position is that a heroin addict, and let me make this let me do this here so I can read it right here. If your position is that a heroin addict who I'm going to go out on a limb and guess isn't paying taxes has the right to shoot up on public streets and make life miserable for all the taxpayers who are forced to fund the roads, and that's what liberty is, then you will be dismissed by all reasonable people and you deserve it. And then he kind of, and another comment there, he says, libertarians, there is no reason at all to marry yourself to these goofy views, right? So this is I think the core of what he was saying yesterday, right? Now there was a bunch of conversation, and he was like, look, imagine this scenario that you've got this heroin addict, they're on the street and they're in front of your house, and you might want your little child might want to go out and ride their bicycle up and down the street. And it's almost a who gets priority, right? That's kind of the problem that we're dealing with in a sense. But I think the real problem that we're dealing with is that We're trying to communicate to people who are not libertarian, who do not hold libertarian views. They do not see, they do not start with this idea that you own yourself. And because they don't, they're starting somewhere else, wherever that is. And it could be all over the place. They're starting wherever they are. We're starting over here. They are the people that are working in corporate America. We're the people that are walking around saying, how can we make things better? But when we talk to them, I think the message gets garbled and it sounds more like, how can I put you at more risk? Right? Like if I'm the guy that's going to go around and tell everybody that I can automate all your Excel tasks, but I come up and I say, what can I automate for you? Which I did. That's literally what I said to people. What can I automate for you? The message that a lot of people more than likely heard, at least one person, right, who told me much later, the message they got from that was, how can I potentially automate you out of work? Right? They didn't hear the message that I was trying to send them. They heard something entirely different. Because I think people are largely unimaginative, and with few exceptions, when they do imagine things, it tends to be negative, particularly in politics. This is why politicians are always promising people stuff. Politicians don't win on the idea that I'm going to promise to remove all these barriers and make you more free, because what that sounds like to people is, how will this happen? I'm going to remove all these things. And how will this thing that you think, let me try to say this differently. People think right now that the system that we have provides value in some way, even if it's not perfect, right? They would rather have a police force that's run by the government in the hopes that it's going to catch rapists and murderers than to start thinking about some private security, which in their mind is going to cause all kind of catastrophe. And why is that? Because they're not starting from the same place as we are. We are starting from an entirely different place. And I think the presentation, the way that we come across, leads people to believe something negative is going to happen, because we are operating in a society where you either promise to do things for people, or you're viewed as taking things away. And when you take things away, bad things happen, right? If I take your work away in corporate America by automating it, then guess what? That sounds like a negative, because what will you do? Maybe you'll get fired. Nobody wants that. DL? Hell no, I don't have any work that you can automate. Absolutely not. I'm doing it all by myself, right? And I think it's a mixture. I think it's a mixture of what they hear and then a lack of imagination. If you were to ask any libertarian and you were to say, what would your ideal, what would it look like ideally for you? Right? Like, what's your ideal society? Most libertarians probably have one. We could, oh, it would look like this, and you wouldn't have this, and blah blah blah. We wouldn't have taxes, we wouldn't have a Federal Reserve, we wouldn't have the ATF, we wouldn't have the FBI, blah 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 blah. And all that sounds really really great to most of us, right? To all of us, right? This sounds great, because quietly we're envisioning maybe some other implementation of those things, right? Because at the end of the day, one of the things that I tell people, and I think this is very key when we're communicating the message of liberty. One of the things that I tell people, and I mean non-libertarians, I say, it's not that libertarians don't like some of these mechanisms. Like, people will say, well, you just don't like food inspectors. No, that's actually not true. I mean, I might not like a particular one, or I might not like them as they currently exist in the system that we have. But I actually don't have a problem with the idea of a meat inspector. I think that's a good thing. But I do believe that the government is not going to deliver us the highest quality meat inspectors. They're not going to deliver that by far compared to the free market. I believe that a free market is going to provide us the best, because what ends up happening is you've got company A, company B, and they're fighting to be the meat inspector for my company if I have one. They are the ones that are going to make sure that they deliver quality. I want them because I want them to do a good job, and I want them to have a good reputation, so that when I tell consumers that, hey, company A has inspected my meat, they have a high degree of confidence and they're going to want to come to my business. But then if company A just starts not doing such a good job, or they start having a bad reputation, I want to be able to quickly shift over to company B and say, hey, consumers, guess what? Company A not doing such a good job, and you saw it, I saw it, and guess what? I'm now using company B, right? This is how I would see it. I want this. But all that doesn't get communicated when I say, yeah, that's not the government's job. Right? Like, that doesn't get communicated. What gets communicated is no meat inspector. And so I think what Dave is talking about here, now what he's talking about is slightly different I'm than what I'm talking about right now. What I'm talking about right now is how does it sound to the greater world when we talk about our ideas? Now, what Dave was talking about, let's go back to that real quick. If Dave was talking to my mom and she saw this, she said she would read this and go, oh, sounds like you want to do something about the heroin addict, which I would prefer not to be shooting up in front of my house, in front of my children, right? So what he's doing here now, I know that people argue with him and they say, hey, I think you're wrong. This is not principled, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But think about what he's saying, and think about how the non-libertarian world would receive this. Don't think about how you receive it. See, this is the problem. Libertarians, and I'm guilty, okay? Whenever I say libertarians, I include myself, right? We're all guilty. We're very selfish, but I don't mean it in the way that we're accused of. Like, a lot of people will accuse and say, well, you're very selfish because, you just want to step over bodies and, it's okay. And not that kind of selfish. We're selfish in that we want to hear ideas communicated in the way that is pleasing to us. But guess what? We're already libertarians. We've already been convinced. We don't need to hear that message that way. We need to understand where people like Dave Smith and others are coming from, but we need to start having the conversation in a way that makes sense to non-libertarians, in a way where they're not immediately taken back and saying, oh my God, you want to get rid of all these things? You want a catastrophe? Like, you're comfortable with it? Like, you would be cool if the world just collapsed around you so long as people didn't walk on your lawn? Like, that's the message they hear. The message they need to hear is, how will the society that we want to build protect them? How will it protect their children? Right? Now, I know a lot of libertarians are first going to go, DL, it's the parent's job. Stop right there. That's the problem. You need to communicate this to where people are. And you have to talk to them, and you have to get a sense. You have to learn to read the room, right? Now, I know on Twitter, a lot of people might be saying, well, but DL, like, this is Twitter, and we're having a conversation among ourselves, right? Well, yes and no. Dave Smith has 400,000 followers. Do you think that every single one of them are libertarians? Do you think that every person that sees the conversations that he has with other people are also libertarians? No. So let's take a look at some things here. And I might make some people upset because I'm not putting any effort into scrubbing names. So if your name comes up and I criticize something you said, don't take it personal. All I'm doing is illustrating a concept here that we need to change how we have our conversation. Think of it like this. We need to have conversations among libertarians when it's libertarian time. And then we need to learn to have conversations when other people are present, or two non-libertarians. And those conversations should sound relatively similar. So let's take a look at some stuff here. So it turns out we can go and we can view some of the quote tweets that people had of this. All right. So we're going to just scroll. And I did not do much prep. I just kind of scrolled through and I said, yep, I think this will work. So we're just going to see what we see. All right. What Dave Smith misses time and again is that people do not get uncomfortable enough with statism until they feel the pain of tragedy. So long as the symptoms are masked, like the Federal Reserve does with printing fiat, people continue to believe government is the solution. Now, I don't disagree with any of that. Well, I don't know about the misses time and again, but in terms of the people are not uncomfortable enough with statism until they feel the pain of tragedy, I agree with that. So long as the symptoms are masked, like the Federal Reserve does with printing fiat, people continue to believe government is the solution. I agree with that, right? So long as people have, but again, they're starting from a different place. And the problem that I have with this response here is that this response is out in what you might consider to be the public square. That's what Elon Musk wants Twitter to be. He wants it to be a public square, except for libertarians, the liberty community, were having conversations as if this was our own private room where only libertarians were in there, right? Because we're not talking in a way that somebody like my mom or my wife would understand. My wife is not a libertarian and she actually hates politics. Sometimes it drives her crazy when I come down. I'm like, dude, you got to hear about this. And I'm going on and on and on about something, right? And then she's like, okay. She's patiently listening, right? But she's not interested. She's really not. And it needs to be in yeah, the conversation. If I want to convince her to vote in a particular way or to adopt an idea, needs to be in a way that makes sense to her. If I start throwing out terms like statism and fiat and Federal Reserve, right over her head. Not because she's not smart, because she's ducking. She's literally ducking. She's like, those aren't words that I use in my everyday language. So therefore, I'm just going to ignore it. I'm going to gloss right over it, or I'm only going to get part of the message, or I'm going to misconstrue the message altogether, right? And this is what I'm talking. When I was a Christian, we used to have a term. We would say, "Stop speaking Christianese." It's like libertarians just cannot help but speak libertarianese. Sometimes that comes with specific phrases, statism, normie, um, collectivism. Like these are all words that are not in common use with our everyday folk, right? The people with our neighbors and our friends and family, unless they're super duper into politics and they're likely to be all about libertarianism, chances are they're not using those words. If they're just regular everyday people that got some opinions here and there about Joe Biden, Donald Trump, and what the Republicans and Democrats are doing, if they're the typical person like that, they're not using those words, right? And it's not that they can't understand them, they just don't use them. So we're not getting our message across. All right, so let's continue on. Let's take a look. What else we got? To argue that government legitimately can or should apply any arbitrary criteria to restrict access to public roads is to legitimize the COVID lockdowns. It diminishes that violation into a question of what government should do rather than actually violating individual rights. So again, I think this comment, and look, the people that are showing up on the screen right now, I consider them friends. Like I have no beef with them. And hopefully they're not going to watch this and then have beef with me. Right. But again, I'm looking at this and I'm like, how is this of value to an onlooker? Right. Like this is, even though it's not using terms, specific terms, right? It is still having a conversation in the context of what libertarians would have. And so it's not addressing something that people who are non libertarians can understand. It just sounds like insider baseball in a sense. All right, let's go to this next one. Now, I actually like this one. It says the world is filled with complex problems, and we can't even agree on how to manage something like a sidewalk. I think this is a very illustrative point. I mean, I want you to think about that for a minute. We're having trouble arguing. We're having trouble deciding what to do with a sidewalk, and we want to tell people like we got answers for you. We can, we've got better answers than the current system you've got now, except for we're busy arguing about statism, collectivism, sidewalks. Can somebody who's homeless be on the public sidewalk in front of your house? I mean, it's public property, so therefore they have a right to it, and well, there's nothing we can do about it. In fact, let me scroll down to another comment here. Let's see here. This is an interesting one. I don't know who this person is. Dave Smith struggles to understand why libertarians want to operate based on the logical conclusion of his own ideology. what did I say? I wonder if I could pull this comment up. I'm gonna try to pull it. I'm not gonna pull it up on the screen, but I'm gonna, I want to see if I can't find something very, very quickly. And I'm going to tell you, let's see here, if I can find it. So, um, um, let's see if I can, I'm not gonna be able to find it there. I might be, for some reason that search doesn't work. Let me try it on my phone. I'm going to try to find something very, very quickly here and see if I can't make a point to you guys. So where are we here? I'm going to do this. I'm trying to do this really quickly. So I know it's a little awkward trying to, know, um, trying to research something. I think I can find it here though. Let's see here. Um, oh, I want to see if I can find this comment. I should have it ready. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to find it. So this is gonna make it super duper awkward here. So, nope. Let's see. Is that one it? Nope. Nope. Dang it. I can't find it. That you know what? That's unfortunate. I had a great comment in a conversation, a private conversation with a friend the other day, and I was basically pointing out something along the line of like conservatives, like every group has their thing. Liberals want to be they want a virtue signal. The right, what did I say the right wanted? The right has, something to do with their the right's big thing is morality. They want to talk about morality all the time, even though half of them aren't, they don't live up to the same standard that they express. And I said libertarians, they talk about principles. Like that seems to, and what I mean by this is that each group, that seems to be their focus more so than actually communicating their message to other people, right? Like liberals would rather, and I mean in the liberal conservative dichotomy, liberals would rather talk about they would rather talk about, like preen their moral feathers and be like virtue signal, like, hey, I just did this thing for minorities, right? Like they do that all the time. Conservatives are always talking about how moral they are or how this thing is, tearing down our society, right? There's just this hyper focus on morality. And then libertarians, they're about their principles. It's almost like they want to talk about their principles for the purpose of being principled. And like, hey, I'm principled. Yay. I didn't present any ideas that other people can grab onto and get behind, but I'm sure I'm principled. And that's kind of what this comment reads to me, right? Like, hey, libertarians want to operate based on the logical conclusion. Like you're so worried about the logical conclusion that you aren't being effective, right? And being logical for the sake of being logical is not effective. If it were, libertarians would have dominated politics by now. We're not dominating politics because we're not having a conversation with people or in front of people for which they can get behind and understand. So this comment is gibberish. All right. That's my I'm trying not to rant too much. All right. So this one I thought was very interesting. See here. Let's get it back up a little bit there. There we go. If your life is made miserable because someone is outside, not on your property, doing something you don't like, maybe get a freaking hobby. For real? Like Dave Smith is talking about, hey, I have a solution or I have this idea on how to deal with drug junkies in front of your house. And the libertarians are like, I mean, if you don't like what they're doing, just get a hobby. Like, oh, they're shooting up outside. Go work on your go work on your train track. Why don't you go collect some stamps? You know, go in your backyard and just work in your garden. Stop worrying about it. Really? That's your answer? That's what we have to offer the public? That's even worse than what I did in corporate America. When I walked around and I said, "Well, hey, can I automate something for you?" At least I sounded like I might have something for them. At least I thought I did, right? Like this is even worse. This is like I don't even want to address it. This would almost be like my coworker saying, "Man, I struggle so much with this." And I said, "Well, you struggle so much with it. Why don't you go do something else?" How is this appealing? How does this move liberty forward? It doesn't. It absolutely doesn't move forward. All right, let's see. Any more comments that we want to make on this? Yeah, so this is where he quote tweets, or he or she quote tweets Dave Smith, and they're like, "Oh, you should get a hobby if you're so worried about drug addicts," you know. And then and then let's see here. Dave Smith said, "So if parents are upset that their city streets are full of homeless encampments, human feces, needles, and people doing hard drugs in the streets, all happening right now in major cities, by the way, and their children have to see this every day, your response is get a hobby. What's the big deal, man? I couldn't think of a more juvenile and repulsive attitude. Same thing. Let me tell you something. If I was a conservative and I heard that, like once upon a time, I actually was a conservative, but if I were still a conservative and I heard that, I would be like, these bozos have no solutions. Their solution is just to let things run rampant, and the very negative stereotype of anarchy, of people just running the streets lawlessly, that's what I would take away from that. I would and that's what people are that's how people take away. But again, we're having this conversation in public. So we're not even disputing and saying, "Hey, Dave, I see what you're trying to say. You're trying to resolve this issue of, human feces and needles and all these negative things in the way of people who might want to have a little bit nicer society." And I don't think that I think your idea doesn't sound bad, but here's a better way to handle that. That's not what we're doing. Instead, we're holding Dave's feet to the fire, and anyone else for that matter, and we're saying, "You're not being principled." We're saying, "You need to get a hobby," or we start using all these words, and if you start going through all the tweets, you're gonna see all this language, this libertarianese, this language about what and none of it is a value add to onlookers. None. Right? It's only good if people already know these terms and they're interested in this kind of conversation. But if you're not, if you're the kind of person who starts thinking, "Hey, I've got a family and I don't want my kid seeing druggies," then this isn't a conversation for you to learn anything from. And this is what I'm getting at, right? We need to start having conversations in a way where we read the room. If we're all by ourselves, sure, we can have these kind of conversations, right? Like, fine, no big deal. We can argue about, hey, is that really the most principled take? Isn't that aren't you kind of taking a more collectivist view of this? And wouldn't it be better if we did it this way? That would be fine if we're kind of more in private, right? Where we're more insulated from the outside world, the normies that people like to say. That would be okay if we're not there. But once we step into the limelight, once we're in the public square or we're talking to the public, we need to do way better. And we need to start addressing ideas and telling people how, what will it look like? And in a way that they can get behind. Now, if you're the kind of person that says, "Look, I'm not straying from my principles. I am only going to offer solutions that are 100% principled," which, by the way, I don't even think exist, because you're kind of saying that you're perfect and that all your ideas you come up with are perfect. And no, you ain't Jesus. Get over yourself. But let's assume that you're that kind of person. Cool. That means you still need to figure out how to communicate those ideas in a way which people can understand and get behind. You need to knock off all the jargon, and you need to discuss it in a way that makes sense to people, which in order to do that, you need to understand where they are. You need to recognize, okay, this person that I'm talking to right now, where are they? Are they diehard conservative? Are they a liberal? Are they, and I mean in the liberal conservative, context, are they a feminist? Are they somebody? Yeah, I'm sorry. You're hungry, man. I tell you what, this producer is demanding. All right, give me 5 minutes. How about that? All right, I told my producer 5 minutes. We're going to start the clock here. All right, so you need to figure out who these people are first and foremost if you're talking to somebody directly. But if we're talking in the public square, which is basically what Twitter is, we need to learn to tailor our conversation so that if somebody comes across this conversation, they can follow it and it will make sense to them, right? If somebody like my wife just happened to get on Twitter and she started seeing some of these responses, she's going to skim right on by, because none of those responses are spoken about in a way, jargon or not, they're not spoken about in a way that's going to be understandable or even appealing, for that matter. I mean, my wife's a mom, right? Like, and if she reads that your solution to a junkie doing hard drugs and defecating out on the public street in front of our home, if she hears that your answer is to tell her to get a hobby, you're done. You don't get a second chance. She's not interested because you didn't provide even a shred of a solution. All you did was make yourself feel good. And that's what I mean. You're selfish, not in the sense that people tend to present libertarianism. It's not that kind of selfish. You just want to hear ideas how you want to hear them, which basically makes you useless. Not even a useful idiot, useless. No value. And it's a good thing that person was anonymous because they're not providing any value. As libertarians, we need to provide value. And it's a tough conversation to have. And I know I'm going to make some libertarians angry. And they'll be like, no, DL, you want me to water it down. No, I want you to get better. I want you to learn how to communicate to people in a way that they can go, that's a good point. Okay, you're onto something. I see your point. They may not agree with you, but you got to be able to get them to the point where they say, all right, I see what you're saying. And that kind of makes sense. And you don't do that by telling them to get a hobby in a way, as a means to address um, druggies, shooting up hard drugs. There's a reason. Like, I live in Jacksonville, and there's a neighboring city, St. John or county, St. Johns County. So I live in Duval County, St. Johns County. Duval County is known not to have great public school systems. Okay, but St. Johns County is. So what happens, people? You know what happens. People move in droves. And it is very well known that when people become parents, they start considering maybe I should move to St. Johns County, right? Because they're going to go where they feel like they can raise their family. And if our answer is you stay put, get a hobby, and don't worry about the guy defecating on the street, doing hard drugs, you've lost the conversation and you are not an ambassador for liberty. And you might as well not even bother, because who cares how principled you are if you can't even get people to come around or be sympathetic to your ideas? Being principled doesn't matter. It just doesn't, because you're being principled just so you can say it. It is no different than the liberal who gets out there and says, I hired a black person today because I am a true ally. You are the same thing. It's the same thing. Or it's the same thing as a conservative who gets out there and they say, oh, we are really moral people. We've got all these moral ideas. And here's our legislation to make morality happen in America and make it great again. Right? You're all just virtue signaling. And that's why liberty doesn't get anywhere. All right. That's my rant. And I only had 5 minutes. All right. David Moscript says, and I hope I said your last name correct. Good stuff. Thanks for saying this. I do my best. All right, folks, let's see what we got here. Closing. Where's my closing? Move things around. I hope you found this informative, and I hope you found it inspiring. I know I'm kind of giving it tough and being a little scolding, the Liberty Dad, raising the Liberty Dad voice. I get it. But I still hope that you found it informative and inspiring, and that you will think about the conversations that you are having when you're out and about. Now, again, just to be clear, when you're talking just within the earshot of only libertarians, have at it. That's cool. Work those things out, but then be prepared to have a conversation that can be understood and adopted and at least sympathized by non-libertarians when you're in earshot of non-libertarians or talking directly to them. You need to be able to do both. And if you can't, stop talking and go figure out how you can improve, right? So I hope that's the inspiration that I'm giving you today. It's not just me ranting at you. All right. I want you to be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern, for an informed discussion on politics and culture. And then again on Sundays at 7 p.m. with my co-host Susan Hogarth, where we look across the vastness of tyranny that's in this United States, and we find out what the Libertarian Party is up to the best of our ability. We package that information together and we bring it to you so that you can be inspired by what's happening with the Libertarian Party. I want you to be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel or to my Rumble channel if you prefer. Somebody's excited for the day. Go to youtube.libertydad.com or rumble.libertydad.com. While you're there, please drop me a comment and let me know how I'm doing. Lastly, I want you to remember, if you're a champion of liberty, this is important. If you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. You got to sell it. So I want you to have a great week, a great weekend. But for now,